For so many new directors who are not coming from a background in cinematography or photography, one of the most daunting aspects of filmmaking is lenses. So let's go through the basics so that you feel a little bit more comfortable making lens choices for your film. What's up friends, the Nerdy Filmmaker here. Today, like I said, we're going through lenses. So what this video is not about is what the right set or brand of lenses is for your film. What we're going to be going through is the explanation of different focal lengths and apertures, which are across any set of lenses, and is one of the most important decisions when determining the look of each one of the shots in your project. All right, so, hey, first off, what's focal length? To simplify it down, focal length is measured in millimeters. And to put it in its simplest terms, it's how zoomed in or zoomed out your lens is. So for example, right now I'm at about 24 millimeters. But if I go to 16, you got that. And if you go to 35, you got that. Oh, my head's cut off. So essentially, the greater the number of your millimeter, of your focal length, the more zoomed in it is. The most common focal lengths of cinema lenses are ranging usually from like 18 to 24 to 35, 50, 85, around there. Those are usually the most common focal lengths of especially entry-level cinema lenses. Now, what kind of effect does this have on your image? Because you could just zoom out and get the camera closer, or zoom in and move the camera backwards. Now, the first effect it has on your footage is through what's called field of vision. So if you think of the camera's field of vision as a triangle, the more zoomed out it is, the wider that field of vision is. And the more zoomed in it is, the tighter that field of vision is. Now, the effect that has when focusing on a subject, like a person, is how much of the background you're going to see as well. Because as you move it closer and zoom out, that triangle widens, therefore seeing more of what's behind the actor. And likewise, the more you walk it back and zoom in, the less of the background you're going to see. So if the background in the space is important in creating an ambiance for that shot, widening it up, and if you still want the actor to be very prominent, moving it closer. But if you want to fill the frame with the actor and really exclude any of the background, let's say making it a bit more intimate and focusing a lot more on just the performance of the actor, you could back up and zoom in. Now, that's not the only thing to consider when choosing your focal length. The second aspect is distortion. And I usually explain it like this. When you're walking through a forest, and you're going like, yo, hello tree, hello tree. I think if I even used this analogy in another video about lenses. You can walk by them, you go like, oh, hello tree, hello leaf. But if you're walking through a forest, you are seeing every individual tree. You're also seeing the distance between those trees. But if you were standing on top of a mountain looking at the forest from afar, it would basically just look like a big flat painting. And that's because the further you are away, the less depth you see between objects. And the closer in you are amongst the trees, you'll start to see that depth. Now, there's two different ways that this really affects your image. The first one is through movement. So just like as you are walking through the forest and you're seeing things pass by, the wider that your lens is, the more you'll feel movement as your camera is tracking. So let's say you're doing a shot where you're moving behind or through chairs or pews in a church or objects set across a table. If you want that movement to be clearer and more noticeable and feel that depth, those layers between foreground, middle ground, and background, you'll want a wider lens. And if you don't want so much of that, then use a longer lens. The second way this really affects it is, as I said, it is distortion. And so, if you get closer to a subject's face, you'll start to see greater depth between the features of their face. The wider your lens is, the more it will accentuate different portions of, let's say, a person's body. So if it's a wider lens and I do this, you're gonna see a much larger emphasis and distance between my hand and my face. As I move in and out, that movement will be a lot more, I'm looking down here because I have a screen down here. You'll see more accentuated movement as this person moves back and forth. It'll be I'll be much bigger in the frame and then much smaller. If you back up and zoom in, that movement will seem a lot less accentuated. But also, it'll accentuate the distance between different, let's say, parts of my face. So right now at about 24 millimeters, you see, what you see on my face. But then as I get closer and zoom out, all of a sudden, I start looking a lot goofier, right? Because my nose seems bigger because that is closer to the lens and it's accentuating the distance between this and my ears. I'm sorry that you had to look at that. So if we compare that to, let's say, photography, a lot of fashion photographers who are doing, let's say, full body shots use wider lenses to accentuate, let's say, the length of a model's legs, where headshot and portrait photographers will generally use more zoomed in lenses to avoid that distortion and flatten an image. So let's say someone was trying to emphasize the power of a character and they're using a low angle. That wider lens might kind of make them seem more commanding because that distance is accentuated. So those are kind of the key components of focal length and how they affect your image. When it comes to aperture, it's a little bit simpler. Simplified again, aperture is talking about the size of the hole in your lens, which can be controlled independently of the other facets of your lens. Aperture is usually measured in something called f-stops or t-stops depending on your lens. The lower the number, the wider it is, and the higher the number, the more closed down it is. Different lenses will have different minimum apertures. Some can only open up to 2.8, some to 2, some even as wide as 1.5 or 1.2. Now, the effect that the aperture has on your image, other than letting in more or less light, is creating a difference in the depth of field. And what the depth of field affects is how selective your focus is. So if you were to have a wider aperture or open up your aperture, so if you're talking to your cinematographer and you say, I want you to open up a bit, that would mean that the object that you're focusing on is still in focus, but everything else in the background and foreground falls out of focus much faster. Whereas if you close down your aperture, things in the background and foreground start to become a little less blurred, a little bit sharper. So if you want to be seeing more details in the background or things on the desk around the actor, you may want to close down. And if you don't, you actually want it to be a very shallow depth of field, you're going to want to open up. The small caveat to that is if there's a lot of movement in the scene, let's say the person is talking or moving around and you're having trouble keeping focus, you might want to make it a little bit easier on your cinematographer and your assistant camera's life and close down a little bit just to give them a bit more leeway so that the actor is not going constantly in and out of focus. So there you have it, friends. You select your focal length, your millimeters, based on how tight you want the field of vision or how much distortion and depth you want or don't want in your image, and you choose your aperture based on how selective you want that focus to be. That's it, friends. I hope that was helpful. If you're a new filmmaker and you have any questions about lenses that were not covered in this video, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to get to them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to start getting ready for the first Christmas party of the year. Yeah! All right, hey, have a good one. Camera off.